Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a massive, catastrophic turning point in modern economic history, the 1997 Asian financial crisis. Throughout this, you're going to notice a running theme of fragile elbow macaroni noodles. It sounds kind of weird, right? But honestly, it's the absolute perfect metaphor for the seemingly rigid yet profoundly vulnerable financial systems that dominated East and Southeast Asia in the late 90s. Because one wrong move and the entire structure just snaps.
So, how exactly does one single decision about the Thai baht back in July of '97 accidentally rewrite the rules of global capitalism? Well, to understand the massive macroeconomic imbalances we live with today, we really have to look back at the dominoes that fell that summer.
All right, part one, the hidden financial trap. The absolute root cause of this whole disaster, it boils down to what's called a double mismatch. Now, the problem wasn't huge government debt. The problem was hiding in plain sight in the private sector, across corporate balance sheets all throughout Asia. They were taking on unhedged short-term foreign loans. It was literally a ticking time bomb just waiting for a spark.
Here's exactly how the trap was set. First up, you have the currency mismatch. Domestic banks and corporations were borrowing low-rate US dollars, but they were earning unpegged local currency. Then, you stack on a maturity mismatch. They're using these short-term foreign loans, which they had to roll over constantly, to fund long-term, illiquid domestic stuff like massive real estate and infrastructure projects. It's exactly like trying to build a heavy, monumental mosaic out of wet noodles. It looks great for a second, but it has zero structural integrity.
And this whole vulnerability was compounded by the famous Mundell-Fleming impossible trinity. In economics, this basically dictates that a country just cannot simultaneously maintain a fixed exchange rate, free capital mobility, and an independent monetary policy. You got to pick two. But Asian central banks in places like Thailand, Indonesia, and South Korea, they mistakenly tried to hold all three. They pegged their currencies to the dollar, which made foreign investors feel like there was zero risk. So massive amounts of unhedged capital just poured in.
Which brings us to part two. Thailand drops the peg.
That illusion shattered incredibly fast. Economic growth slows down, a huge real estate bubble bursts in Thailand, and suddenly global hedge funds smell blood in the water. They launch aggressive speculative attacks, shorting the baht. Capital abruptly flees. The Bank of Thailand burns through their foreign exchange reserves, desperately trying to defend that peg until, in July 1997, the money is literally just gone. They had no choice but to float the currency. This became known as the Tom Yam Goong crisis.
And the fallout? The Thai baht immediately crashed by about 50%. Since domestic companies owed their debt in US dollars but made their money in plummeting baht, their debt burdens basically doubled overnight. That fragile financial noodle structure we talked about, it completely and catastrophically crumbled.
Moving right along to part three, the Asian contagion spreads.
Just look at the terrifying speed of this domino effect. In a matter of mere months, investors realized that if Thailand's supposedly safe currency peg was a total mirage, everyone else might be hiding the exact same double mismatch vulnerabilities. And, well, they were right. Capital fled the entire region en masse.
By August, the contagion slammed into Indonesia. Their corporate sector held massive amounts of unhedged US dollar debt. When the capital fled, the Indonesian rupiah collapsed by a staggering 80%. The economic devastation there was so deep it sparked hyperinflation, food riots, and ultimately ended President Suharto's 31-year regime in 1998.
Then, by October, speculators went after the Hong Kong dollar peg, but Hong Kong fought back with overwhelming force. To defend their peg, the monetary authority spiked overnight interest rates to a mind-boggling 300%. They made it incredibly expensive for hedge funds to borrow the local currency just to short it.
Alongside those 300% interest rates, Hong Kong deployed a highly unconventional defense. The government stepped right into the equity market, directly purchasing over $15 billion in local stocks. This effectively squeezed out the short sellers, and it worked. They saved the peg, but man, it came at a massive cost to the local economy.
Just a month later, in November, the contagion hit South Korea. Their massive corporate conglomerates, the chaebols, were deeply reliant on short-term foreign bank debt. South Korea came within days of a national sovereign default. But what's truly profound here is the national response. South Korean citizens actually lined up to donate 226 tons of their personal gold. We're talking wedding rings, heirlooms, trophies, just to help their country pay off its foreign bank debt.
Which leads us to part four,
the IMF austerity backlash.
To stop the total collapse of these economies, the International Monetary Fund stepped in, putting together over $118 billion in emergency rescue packages across the region. But, this lifeline was definitely not a blank check. It came with some incredibly heavy structural strings attached.
The IMF rolled out their conditionality playbook. They demanded strict fiscal austerity, meaning drastic cuts to government spending. They mandated steep interest rate hikes to try and stop the capital flight, and they forced the rapid opening of domestic financial markets to foreign capital. It was a rigid, unyielding structure forced onto economies that were already in complete freefall.
And this playbook sparked immense local backlash. Critics fiercely argued that by forcing interest rates sky high to protect the currency, the IMF was essentially strangling the local economies. Those high rates pushed heavily stressed but otherwise totally solvent domestic companies straight into bankruptcy. Mass insolvencies followed. For many, it felt like the austerity measures took what started as a severe liquidity panic and turned it into a deep, prolonged depression.
And finally, Part 5, the global reserve pivot.
This whole crisis triggered a massive global paradigm shift. Think of it as moving from those fragile noodles to a complex, rock-solid mosaic. Asian nations essentially made a collective vow: never again. Never again would they be dependent on Western-dominated emergency lenders, and never again would they be subjected to IMF austerity. To make sure of it, they permanently established floating exchange rates, implemented strict capital controls, and most importantly, mandated deep central bank foreign exchange reserves.
To build up those massive defensive war chests, East Asian central banks systematically pivoted to aggressive export-led growth models. They kept their currencies highly competitive to sell goods to the West, and they took all the dollars they earned and aimed them squarely at accumulating massive foreign reserves. Primarily, they did this by buying hundreds of billions in U.S. treasuries. This sparked the global reserve pivot, fundamentally rewiring modern finance and laying the exact groundwork for the macroeconomic imbalances we still see today.
So, what's the ultimate historical takeaway from 1997? It proves that surface-level economic health can be a complete illusion. A country can have rapid GDP growth, incredibly high savings rates, and wonderfully low government debt, yet still face total systemic collapse if its private sector is secretly drowning in a double mismatch trap. Balance sheet vulnerability matters way more than traditional GDP metrics when the tides of global capital suddenly turn.
Today, emerging markets sit on trillions of dollars in U.S. treasuries, a direct defensive reaction to the trauma of 1997. So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder about the complex financial mosaics we live with today. In a world entirely built on these massive defensive foreign reserves, who truly holds the power when the next domino inevitably falls? Thanks for joining this explainer.